The Secret Lake, Chapter 3, Dawn Escape. Funnily enough, it was Stella who had trouble sleeping that night. Tom in his room next door was out like a light the moment his head touched the pillow. A boat, Stella whispered repeatedly. How on earth could it have got there? And why was Harry soaked to the skin? She was thinking how first thing tomorrow they would have a good scout around in the bushes when a hollow clank from somewhere outside made her sit up. The clock at her bedside read 5 a.m. She must have fallen asleep. Still thinking about Harry, she crept from her bed to her window. The sun hadn't risen and the garden was bathed in a gray early morning mist. Nothing. It must have been a dream. But then, as she was about to drop back the curtains, the clanking echoed again. Stella peered to the right in the direction it seemed to have come from. A high-pitched squeak, followed by another clank. Then through the dim half-light, she spotted Harry, trotting across the lawn in the direction of the island. The clanking must have been him, trying to nudge open Mrs. Moon's patio garden gate. "Tom, quick, wake up!" Sheila tugged violently at Tom's pajamas. "What? Where's the mole? Get it off me!" "Oh, wake up, will you?" Stella snapped in a whisper. Tom sat up in a damp sweat. He had been dreaming that a friendly mole had just started to attack him. "What's going on?" he mumbled, as his sister's face loomed in front of him in the dark. "It's Harry. He's gone off again. I've just seen him." Tom immediately woke up, then fell on the floor as he tried to jump out of bed in a hurry. "Let's get after him," he squealed, diving for his dressing gown. Moments later, they stood at the top of the hallway stairs. "Quietly," mouthed Stella, glaring like a schoolteacher. Slowly they crept down and then put on their trainers and slipped outside into the gray morning air. "Come on, we haven't got much time," Stella whispered. She grabbed Tom's hand and together they raced across the damp grass towards the island, wearing only their pajamas, dressing gowns, and trainers. What do you think trainers are? In England, I think trainers they call our tennis shoes or shoes. That's my guess. "Drat, we've missed him," said Stella. They hunted around the island for a good 5 minutes. All was still and there was no sign of Harry, but at least the log was still in place, which meant that Charlie Green hadn't noticed their digging. "We just have to come back and have a good look when it's light," she said with a sigh. They then squelched back across the lawn, their trainers soaked with early morning dew. It was about halfway back that something caught the corner of Tom's eye. He glanced to his right, and through the fading dawn mist, for a moment, he thought he saw a group of 3 or 4 moles scampering in a circle on the grass. But when he blinked, they had gone. The half-light was playing tricks on them. Cold and shivering, they returned to their beds and slept soundly. The ring of the telephone shattered the early morning calm. "Hello?" "Oh, no, Mrs. Moon, not again. I am so sorry. Yes, of course, we'll let you know if we see him. Of course, we'll call you right away. Goodbye, Mrs. Moon." As they lay in their separate bedrooms, Tom and Stella listened to their mother's conversation, each thinking how their earlier jaunt really hadn't been a dream after all, and how after breakfast they must continue searching for Harry. Chapter 4, The Secret Lake. I don't know how a lake could be secret. By 10 o'clock, Tom and Stella were back at the mound, complete with picnic lunch boxes. Stella, who was plugged into her iPhone music as usual, had brought a pocket torch for looking inside the bushes. For the first time in 3 weeks, she also had a broad smile on her face. Tom had his red birthday binoculars slung around his neck, his digging trowel in one hand and his treasure rags stuffed in the pocket. "Right, we're going to have a good look inside this bush," said Stella. She got down and crawled on all fours into the rhododendron bush that Harry had appeared from the morning before. Tom quickly surveyed the garden with his binoculars to see if Charlie Green was around. Remember Charlie Green? He's the gardener. "Coast clear, coming in," he shouted, and then immediately spotted something moving in the shade of one of the distant trees. Were those moles again? He refocused the binoculars to get a better look, but there was nothing there. "I think I'm going bonkers," he mumbled under his breath. Then he scrambled in after his sister, yelling, "Ouch!" every few seconds as the binoculars thumped against his knees. "Tom, be quiet," snarled Stella after the fourth "ouch." "Do you want someone to hear us?" As they crawled deeper inside the thicket, she switched on her tiny torch, which shone a narrow beam of light ahead through the dark. Nothing. Only twigs, more twigs, green leaves, dead leaves, rotten flowers, and ugh, creepy crawlies scuttling back and forth across the undergrowth. The leaves brushing on Stella's hair suddenly gave her the shivers. "There's nothing here, Tom," she said, dusting imaginary beetles from the top of her head. "Let's go back." Tom had just begun to maneuver himself round on the spot, twigs scratching at him from all sides, when his right arm slipped down a hole so deep that on one side he was suddenly up to his shoulder in undergrowth. "Hey," he bellowed, "I found a hole." Stella quickly crawled over and pulled him up, and then pointed her torch to investigate. The hole was far wider than either of them could believe. "Yikes, Tom, lucky you didn't fall right in," she whispered. Stella shone the torch down into the darkness. "Well, it's too big for a rabbit hole," she said, flicking the beam of light up and down the inside wall. "Look!" shrieked Tom so suddenly that they both crashed backwards into the undergrowth. Stella sighed angrily, then leaned forward and held the beam of light still against the earth wall. To her astonishment, she could clearly see what Tom had spotted, and she had nearly missed. The rusty metal ladder fixed against the earthen wall and leading down into a hole. "Shall we go down?" said Tom, after they had both stared at the ladder for a minute. Stella didn't answer. Instead, she took out a lime green polo. "Do you think the boat would fit down there?" she suddenly said. They both stared at the hole again. "You're mad," said Tom. Stella popped the polo into her mouth and grinned as her ears started tingling. "Well then, I suppose we'll just have to go down on our own, won't we?" Being the oldest and the largest, Stella went first, grasping tightly onto the rusty rungs and holding her torch between her teeth. Tom followed awkwardly, clutching his trowel and not daring to look down. His binoculars were slung across him like a satchel. "You okay, Tom?" Stella's strange whisper on account of the torch in her mouth echoed eerily up the hole like a toothless ghost. "Fine," he lied in a squeak. Stella had been counting each step as she descended. When she reached 18, she stopped, took the torch from her mouth, and called up. The torch, I think, is a flashlight. "Hey, Tom, I've just realized Harry wouldn't have been able to get down here on his own." "Well, that's just what I was thinking," said Tom. "Weird." Stella, meanwhile, had dangled one foot down, but couldn't feel any more rungs below her. "I think we've reached the end," she called, continuing to display her leg out in the darkness like a tentacle. Suddenly her foot hit something hard and wide that she was able to rest on. As she pointed her torch down, the tiny beam of light bounced off what looked like the branch of a tree. And then she saw that the wall of the tunnel below the last ladder rung was no longer earthen. It looked like tree bark. "Tom, I think we've found an underground tree," she yelled. Carefully, she let go of the last rung of the ladder and grasped a couple of short nodules that were sticking out like giant nail ends from the bark. Dangling one of her feet still lower, she found another branch to rest on. Soon she discovered there were nodules protruding all over the place between the branches, making it easy to keep climbing down. "Follow me," she said. "It's okay." Neither of them had noticed, but the darkness was turning dim gray. After they descended a little farther, Stella stopped. "I don't believe this, Tom. "We're coming to the outside." A pool of light was shining up from below, and as they continued descending, daylight began to surround them. "Huh, are we in Australia?" shouted Tom hopefully. "No idea," said Stella, who could now hear the birds singing. Sometimes they say if you climb down, down, down to the inside of the earth, you'll come out at the country across. Are they really in Australia? Nah. Maybe not. I don't know. The branches now began thinning out, and soon there were only nodules of the tree trunk left to step and grasp onto. The sun-drenched grass below looked soft, so Stella jumped the final couple of meters down. Meters would be like a couple of feet. Then, as she raised herself from the ground, brushing earth and tiny stones from her knees, she looked up to see the most beautiful lake, surrounded by crimson pink flowering bushes, stretching far away in front of her. Thud! Tom, complete with binoculars and trowel, landed beside her. "Told you there was water nearby," said Stella triumphantly, pointing at the lake. Tom, still breathless, clapped his binoculars to his eyes. "Where on earth are we?" he whispered, scanning from left to right, trying to see beyond the trees on the far side. Suddenly he fixed on something moving on the lake. "Look at that, Stell." "Oh my goodness," she murmured. About halfway across the lake, a boy in a small boat was rowing frantically in their direction. Stella snatched the binoculars from Tom to get a closer look, almost throttling him. The boy in the boat didn't see them at first because his back was square onto them as he rowed. However, as he drew closer, he turned and spotted them. As soon as he hit the bank, he clambered out and began to pull the boat high in the direction of the tree. "Geez, a hand with this will here." Tom and Stella, who had not only been able to stand and stepped obediently forward and helped him pull the boat right up under their tree. They were speechless, and all the time couldn't take their eyes off his dirt-smudged face, his ragged brown